The men in town said Astrid Lindqvist would be gone by Christmas. She was 21 years old, a widow of 6 weeks. Her Swedish was better than her English, and her English was better than her chances. The fever that took Anders had taken him in 3 days. 3 days from a man swinging an axe to a man in a pine box. And the ground was still soft over his grave when Cyrus Wendell rode out from town with the papers. He didn't dismount. He sat on his horse at her fence line and counted her property the way a butcher counts cuts. 1 barn, 1 cabin, 1/4 section of black Dakota soil that the railroad wanted back. "Sign it, Mrs. Lindqvist," he said. "Be practical. Winter doesn't care that you're brave." She didn't sign. What Cyrus Wendell didn't know, what nobody in that town knew, was that the night before, Astrid had opened a trunk she hadn't touched in 2 years. And inside that trunk, beneath her wedding dress and her mother's letters, was a small leather journal kept by a grandmother who'd been dead for 6 winters. The journal was full of drawings. Drawings of a house built into the earth. Drawings that would change everything. Because what was coming for the Dakota Plains that winter was not an ordinary winter. It was the storm history would remember. And Astrid Lindqvist was about to do something no man in that county thought a woman could do. She was going to dig down. The wind on the morning Anders Lindqvist was buried did not move like wind. It moved like a hand. A flat, deliberate hand. Pressing down on the brown October grass. Pressing down on the 4 men who carried the pine box. Pressing down on the woman who walked behind them. Astrid was 21. She did not feel 21. Her boots were too big. They had been her mother's. Her dress was too thin. The wool coat she wore over it had been Anders's. It still smelled like him, like sawdust, like the green soap he used, like the inside of a barn after rain. She walked behind the coffin and counted her steps, because counting was something her hands could not do. Her hands were busy not shaking. Her hands were busy holding each other inside the coat pockets like 2 small frightened animals. 43 steps to the grave. 43. She would remember that number for the rest of her life. The minister said words. The men lowered the box. The earth made the sound earth makes when it is trying to swallow something it doesn't want. A wet, reluctant sound. A sound like a throat clearing. And then it was over. And then everyone went home. And then Astrid Lindqvist was alone on a 1/4 section of Dakota soil with a cabin she did not build, a barn she did not finish, and a debt she did not understand. 3 days passed. She did not eat. Not really. A spoon of cold oats, a swallow of water. The chickens ate better than she did. The chickens. 2 of them. Anders had named them. Hilda and Greta. Astrid did not know which was which. She did not want to know. Knowing felt like one more thing she could lose. On the 4th day, she made herself open the cupboard. She made herself look at what was there. A sack of oats, a crock of salt pork, 8 jars of tomatoes she had put up in August, dried beans, a small tin of coffee, 2 onions, some flour, and bills. Bills tucked behind the flour tin like she had hidden them from herself. She read them with her hands flat on the table. Hendrick's General Store. 60 days past due. Northern Pacific Land Office. A note. An extension. Numbers Anders had understood. Numbers Anders had taken on his last ride into town in March, when the ground was still freezing at night and he had come home with a face that was relief pretending to be confidence. He had said it would be fine. He had said the rains would come. The rains had come, the fever had come too, and the fever had been faster. On the 5th day, she sat at the table and did not get up for 6 hours. This is not grief, she told herself. This is something else, because grief has a shape. Grief has a beginning and a middle and the promise of an end. What she was feeling did not have a shape. It was weather. It was the inside of a cloud. It was the particular flavor of being 21 and a widow on a piece of land that had been a wedding present and was now, possibly, a grave. She thought about her mother in Minnesota. She thought about the letter that had come 3 weeks ago. The letter she had not opened. The letter she could not open, because she knew what it said. Come home, Astrid. There is nothing left there. You are too young. You are alone. Come home." She put the letter in the cupboard behind the flour tin. She put it there with the bills. Because the bills and the letter belonged together somehow. They belonged in the dark. On the morning of the 6th day, a horse came up the road. She heard it before she saw it. She knew the sound of a town horse. A town horse moves different than a farm horse. A town horse moves like it expects to be admired. She wiped her hands on her apron. She did not know why. Her hands were already clean. It was the gesture her mother had used. When the minister came, when anyone came, wipe the hands, smooth the hair, open the door like you are not afraid. She opened the door. The man on the horse was not a man she knew, but she knew the type. She had known the type her whole life. He was 43 or 44, heavy in the shoulders, a coat that had cost money, a hat that had cost more, a leather satchel under his arm, a face that had been arranged into kindness the way a shopkeeper arranges fruit. Each piece placed deliberately, none of it grown there. Behind him, on a second horse, was a younger man, lean, watchful, saying nothing. Mrs. Lindqvist. He did not dismount. That was the first thing she noticed. He did not dismount. "Yes, my name is Cyrus Wendell. I represent the Northern Pacific Land Office. I wonder if I might trouble you for a few minutes of your time." His voice was warm. His voice was the warmest part of him. She thought, this man has rehearsed this speech. She thought, this man has given this speech before. She thought, how many times? "You may come in," she said, "out of the cold." "I'd prefer to speak out here, ma'am, out of respect for your situation." "Out of respect for your situation?" She felt her teeth click together behind her closed mouth. Because respect was not what was happening. Respect was the costume the situation was wearing. She stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind her. He talked for 11 minutes. She counted. She counted because she had to do something with the part of her brain that wanted to scream. He talked about Anders. He talked about the extension Anders had taken in March. He talked about the additional draw for spring seed. He talked about the fever, which he called the unfortunate event. He talked about the impossibility, regrettable but real, of a single woman of her age managing a property of this size in the coming season. He talked about a number. The number was the total obligation. The number was very large. He talked about a second number. The second number was what he was prepared to offer. It was, he said, generous. It was, he said, more than the railroad would normally entertain. It was, he said, enough for a train ticket east. Enough for a fresh start. Enough to spare her, ma'am, what was undoubtedly going to be a very difficult winter for someone in her position. He produced a paper from the leather satchel. He held it out. He did not lean down to hand it to her. He held it out and waited for her to walk to the horse to take it. She did not walk to the horse. "Mr. Wendell." "Ma'am, my name is on the deed." He paused. "Yes, ma'am. Your name is on the deed alongside your husband's. That is correct." "Mine, not just his." "Yes. So this paper, this generous paper, it needs my signature, not his, not anyone else's. Mine. That is the legal situation, ma'am. Yes. Then I will need time to read it." "Of course. More time than the 11 minutes you have given me." She had not meant to say 11. She had meant to say a few. But the number came out, and his face did a small thing, a flicker behind the eyes, and she understood that he had registered it. He had registered that she was counting. "I will return on the 1st of December, he said. "That should give you ample time to consider your options." He smiled. It was a smile that had cost as much as the coat. "Be practical, Mrs. Lindqvist. Winter doesn't care that you're brave." He turned the horse. The younger man, who had not spoken once, turned with him. They rode east. She watched them until they were small. She watched them until they were gone. Then she went inside. Then she sat at the table. Then she did not move for a long time. "Be practical, Mrs. Lindqvist." She said it out loud to the empty cabin. She said it the way he had said it. The same warmth, the same smile in the voice. Be practical. She said it again. She said it a third time. And the third time she heard what was underneath it. What was underneath it was, be a woman. What was underneath it was, be the kind of woman who knows when to stop. What was underneath it was, there is a script for what happens next, and you don't get to write it, you only get to perform it. She stood up. Her knees cracked. She had been sitting too long. She walked to the cupboard. She took out the bills. She took out her mother's unopened letter. She put all of it on the table. She looked at the pile. She thought, I have until December 1st. She thought, that is 35 days. She thought, I do not know what I am going to do. She thought, but I am not going to perform. That night she dreamed of Anders. Not a memory dream. Not the kind where the dead come back and say wise things. Just a dream where he was sitting at the table fixing a harness, working leather between his fingers, not looking up, not saying anything, just there. She woke in the dark. The cabin was cold. She could hear her own breath. She lay still and watched it leave her in pale clouds, and she thought, if I leave, who will remember he sat at this table? If I leave, who will remember he fixed harnesses? If I leave, this place becomes a story Cyrus Wendell tells at dinner parties about the regrettable Lindqvist situation, which he resolved. She got out of bed. She wrapped herself in the quilt. She went to the trunk at the foot of the bed. The trunk had been her mother's. It had come with her on the boat. It had come with her west on the train. It still smelled faintly, like the cedar of her grandmother's pantry in Minnesota. She opened it. She was looking for Anders's second wool shirt. She had been sleeping in his first one for weeks. She wanted the second one. She wanted to alternate them. She wanted to make them last. The shirt was near the top. She took it out. She held it to her face. She breathed in. Sawdust, green soap. She set it on the bed. She was about to close the trunk. She did not close the trunk, because at the bottom of the trunk, flat against the cedar, was a book. A book she had not opened in 6 years. A small leather journal, worn at the corners. The cover the color of a chestnut. Her grandmother's journal. Helga Bergstrom. Dead since the winter Astrid was 15. She lifted it out with both hands. The leather was soft. Soft the way old leather gets when it has been touched a lot. She sat on the bed with the journal in her lap, and she did not open it for a long time. Because opening it felt like a door. Because she did not know which side of the door she was on. Because she had a feeling, a small, unreasonable feeling, that opening the journal would mean something. That whatever was on the other side of the cover was going to ask things of her. She thought, I am being silly. She thought, it's just a book. She opened it. The first pages were what she expected. Recipes, pickled herring, cardamom bread, lingonberry preserves. The careful, slanted handwriting of a woman who had been formally educated in a place that did not always educate women formally. She turned the pages slowly. The smell that rose from them was lavender and something else. Something dry and herbal that belonged to her grandmother's kitchen in Minnesota. A kitchen Astrid could still see if she closed her eyes. The blue cups. The window over the sink. The braid of garlic hanging from the beam. She turned more pages. Notes on a kitchen garden. A diagram of root vegetables and where they should be planted relative to the sun. A list of medicinal teas and what they were for. And then, the handwriting changed. Not the handwriting itself. The same hand, but the pace of it, the pressure of it. The pen had been moving faster here, or the writer had been thinking harder. The page was titled, in careful block letters, Jordvärme Hus, Earth Heat House. Astrid stared at the word. Earth Heat House. She did not know that word. She knew Jord. She knew Värme. She knew Hus, but she had never heard them put together that way. Below the title were drawings, cross-sectional drawings, drawings of a structure dug into the ground. She read for 2 hours. Her grandmother had not invented this. Her grandmother had recorded it. The journal said plainly that this was an old Scandinavian building tradition, brought west by farmers who had built such shelters in the home country and rebuilt them in Minnesota during the hard winters of the 1860s. The principle was this: below a certain depth, the earth does not freeze. Below a certain depth, the earth holds the temperature of the previous summer all winter long. Below a certain depth, the earth is a kind of reservoir. You do not heat a room dug into the earth. You inherit the warmth that is already there. A floor of dense stone, charged occasionally with intense heat from above, holds that heat for days. It releases it slowly. The way a stone in a hearth stays warm long after the fire has gone out. You do not fight the cold. You decline to participate in it. Helga Bergstrom had written, in the plain voice she used for verdicts, "The men who build high walls and burn great fires are fighting the wrong battle. The cold is not a thing to defeat. It is a condition to negotiate with. The earth has already made the best terms available. We only have to accept them." Astrid closed the journal. She held it with both hands. She thought, "This is impossible." She thought, "This is not impossible." She thought, Anders never finished the floor of the barn. That last thought sat up like a dog hearing a door. Anders never finished the floor of the barn. The barn frame was sound. The barn roof was shingled. Anders had overbuilt it, the way he overbuilt everything, because he had wanted it to last. But the floor was packed earth. He had ordered planks. He had not laid them. A barn with a packed earth floor. A barn standing directly over soil. A barn she could. A barn she could. She stopped herself. She put the journal on the bed. She lay down with her back to it, like it was a person who was watching her too intently. She thought, "You are 21 years old." She thought, "You do not know how to dig." She thought, "You do not know how to lay stone." She thought, "You do not know how to mortar." She thought, "You are alone." She thought, "You have 34 days." And then, like a small hand in the dark, another thought. Anders said you were stronger than you knew. He said it the night they lit the first fire in this cabin. He said it sitting on the floor with the kindling in his hand. He said it the way he said everything important, quietly, looking at the ground, as if the words might fly away if he looked at them directly. "You are stronger than you know, Astrid. I am only the lucky one who gets to see it." She rolled over. She picked up the journal. She held it against her chest. She slept. She woke at the gray hour. She was already dressed before she remembered why she was getting up. Then she remembered. Oh. She put on her coat. She took the lantern from the hook. She went outside. The air was still. The kind of still that means the cold is settling in. Her breath made columns. She crossed the yard to the barn. She had not been inside the barn since the day before Anders died. She had asked one of the neighbor men to feed Hilda and Greta. She had told herself the chickens did not need her. The truth was she had not been able to walk into the barn without seeing Anders' hands on every board. She walked into the barn. She saw his hands on every board. She let herself see them. She let herself see them for 1 minute. Then she lifted the lantern and looked at the floor. The packed earth was not even. She had not noticed before. Why would she? But now, with the lantern low, she saw what she was looking for. Near the center of the barn, in a rough rectangle maybe 4 feet by 6, the soil was a slightly different color. A little darker, a little softer looking. Like the way a scar is a different color from the skin around it. She crouched. She pressed her palm flat to the soil. She moved her palm to the soil 6 inches to the left. Then back. Then to the left. Then back. The center rectangle gave. Just a fraction. Just enough. It had been disturbed. It had been dug once and filled in. Anders had mentioned it. She remembered now. Anders, last summer, sitting on the porch step and pointing his coffee cup at the barn. "The man before me had a root cellar in there," he had said. Holgerson, I think the name was. Left in '79. Couldn't make it work. The cellar's still down there somewhere. I should dig it out one of these days. He had not dug it out. There had been no day for it. But it was there, underneath her hand, under the soil, waiting. She straightened up. Her knees popped. She was 21. Her knees should not pop. But she had been a widow for 6 weeks, and her knees popped, and her hands trembled, and her hair was coming out of its braid. She picked up the shovel. It had been Anders's. It was hers now. She drove the tip into the disturbed soil. It bit with a crunch that was the most satisfying sound she had heard in 6 weeks. She dug for an hour before her arms stopped working. She sat down on the barn floor and breathed. Her shoulders burned. Her back was a single hot bar of pain across the top. Her hands were already raw at the base of each finger. She got up. She dug for another half hour. The shovel hit something. Not stone, not dirt. The sound was wrong for both. A dull, flat, woody sound. A thud. She got down on her knees. She brushed the soil away with her hands. A plank. A thick, old plank. She felt sideways with her fingers. Another plank. Parallel to the first. Hinged together. A door. A heavy cellar door. Lying flat in the earth where it had been for a decade, since Lars Holgersen had decided this country was too far from town and gone away. She found the iron ring with her fingers before she found it with her eyes. It was so rusted it had blended into the soil. She tried to lift it. The door did not move. She had not expected it to move. She needed a lever. There was a long beam propped against the barn wall. Construction lumber, left over from the framing. She wedged one end of the beam under the iron ring. She used the barn's floor joist as her fulcrum. She put her whole weight on the other end of the beam. The beam flexed. The ground cracked. A thin breath of stale air rose from the seam, and Astrid Lindqvist, 21 years old, widow of 6 weeks, leaned harder. There was a sound, a long, low, tearing sound, like a seam being pulled. The door lifted. In a single shuddering protest, 6 inches, a foot and a half. She caught it with her shoulder before it could fall closed. She held it. She held it for a count of 3. And then, something moved inside the dark. Something small and brown burst out of the hole. Past her face, a streak of feathers and air. She stumbled back. The lantern rocked. A sparrow. A small brown sparrow. It flew out of the open barn door in a panicked arc and was gone into the gray morning. Astrid stood in the barn with her hand pressed to her chest and her breath coming in small white clouds, and she stared at the closed cellar door at her feet. Something had been alive down there. Something small and warm-blooded had been alive down there. She thought, that bird should not be alive. She thought, that bird is alive. She thought, oh, she did not say it out loud. There was nobody to say it to, but somewhere in her chest, behind the place where she had been not crying for 6 weeks, something made a small, decisive sound, like the click of a key in a lock. She did not go down into the cellar that morning. She closed the barn. She walked back to the cabin. Her hands were shaking too hard to hold the lantern steady. She put coffee on. She sat at the table. She watched her own hands lift the cup. She thought, I need help. She thought the words deliberately. I need help. I do not know how to mortar a stone wall. I do not know how to lay a stone floor. I have 34 days. I have 1 shovel. I have 2 hands. She thought of who in this whole county might know what she did not know. She thought of the harvest social in September. A small, square, leather-faced woman in line at Hendrick's store. A woman who had looked at Astrid's supply list and said, without softness, that Astrid was going to need 3 times that amount of salt pork. A woman who, at the harvest social, had turned her back on Cyrus Wendell when he walked into the room. Turned her back so deliberately that the gesture had carried across the entire hall. Hester Thorne, the widow north of the creek, 60 years old, worked her quarter section alone since '78, built her own fences. There was something else. A whisper from the Harvest Social. 2 women near the cider table. Cyrus Wendell took 40 acres of bottomland from Hester's husband's estate in 78. Said Thomas had defaulted. Hester always said the accounting was wrong. Hester always said. Astrid set the cup down. She walked to the window. Outside, the sky had gone a pale, accommodating blue. A mild morning. The kind of morning that pretends to be mercy. The kind of morning that says, the worst is delayed. Astrid Lindqvist knew better. She walked to the cupboard. She took out the unopened letter from her mother. She did not open it. She put it in the journal, between the page of recipes and the page that said, Jord verme hus. She put the letter where she could find it, where she could not avoid it. She put on her boots. She put on Anders's coat. She wrapped a scarf around her neck. She walked out. She turned north, toward the only person in this county who might know how to do what Astrid Lindqvist did not yet know how to do. The wind picked up from the north. It carried something metallic in it, a sharpness. She felt it in her teeth, a warning. She kept walking. Hester Thorne did not invite her in. She opened the door. She looked at Astrid Lindqvist standing on her step with frost on her eyelashes and a leather journal clutched against her chest. She looked at her for a long count of seconds. The wind moved between them, dry and mean. You're the Lindqvist widow. Yes. Your husband died in September. Yes. Hester looked past her, at the empty road, at the flat horizon, at the sky that was promising nothing generous. Then she looked back. At the journal, at the desperation in Astrid's posture, which was not the desperation of begging. It was the desperation of a person who had already decided to do a thing and had only come here because the thing required 2 pairs of hands. You'd better come inside, Hester said. I'll make coffee. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I haven't said I'd help. The kitchen was small. The kitchen was warm. The kitchen smelled like cedar and bacon grease and something herbal that Astrid could not name. There was a black stove, a scrubbed wooden table, a single rocking chair near the window with a folded shawl over the back. No clutter, no wasted motion. The kitchen of a woman who had been alone for 8 years and had made the loneliness into a kind of order. Hester poured coffee. She poured it from a blue enamel pot. She set the cup in front of Astrid without ceremony. Then she sat across the table and put her hands flat on the wood, and waited. Astrid had rehearsed this on the walk over. She had rehearsed it the way a person rehearses an apology to a parent. She opened the journal. She turned it so Hester could see. She started talking. She talked for a long time. She talked about the cellar. She described what she thought it was. She described the sparrow. She described her grandmother's diagrams. She described the principle, the earth below the frost line, the thermal mass, the slow release, the stone floor, the southern window, the flue. She talked the way she had learned to talk in school in Minnesota when she was 12, and the teacher had asked her to recite the parts of a plant, carefully, in order, without skipping. Hester did not interrupt. Hester listened the way some people pray, inside herself, with her eyes on the table. When Astrid stopped talking, the kitchen was quiet for a long moment. The clock on the wall ticked. Hester picked up the journal. She held it at arm's length because her eyes were not what they had been, and she studied the cross-section of the stone floor for a full minute. She turned a page. She studied the ventilation diagram. She turned another page. She studied the angle of the southern window. Then she set the journal down. Your grandmother drew these? Yes. She ever built one? She helped her family build something similar in Minnesota. In the 60s. It was a tradition the old country families brought over. Hester nodded slowly, like she was filing something away. Then she said, Why are you doing this instead of signing his paper? Astrid had not rehearsed an answer to this. She had assumed Hester would ask about money, about logistics, about materials. She had not assumed Hester would ask about her. She opened her mouth. She closed it. She looked at her own hands on the table. The blisters from the shovel were already coming up at the base of her fingers. She thought, give her the answer that is true. she thought. She will know if you give her any other one. Because my name is on the deed. That's not enough. Mine, not just Anders's, mine. That's still not enough. Astrid felt the heat come up the back of her neck. It was not anger. It was something older. Mr. Wendell wants to take a thing that has my name on it, and every reason he gives me, every reason, is a reason that assumes I cannot do anything about the cold except what men have always done about it. Burn more wood, build thicker walls, burn through everything you have. He thinks the script is already written. He thinks I just have to sign my line. She stopped. She had not meant to say all of that. It had come out of her like she had been carrying it folded in her mouth for weeks. Hester pushed back from the table. Her chair scraped against the floor with a sound like a declaration. She walked to the window. She stood there with her back to Astrid, looking out at the bare yard. When she spoke, she did not turn around. Cyrus Wendell took 40 acres of my husband's bottomland in '78. The arithmetic he used didn't survive scrutiny. I had the records. Thomas had been a careful man. The numbers Cyrus brought to me after the funeral were not the numbers Thomas had paid against. They were close enough to look right, if you weren't looking. They were not right. A pause. I went to the territorial clerk. I went twice. The second time, I brought the records. By the time I brought the records that Cyrus had filed had already been entered. The clerk told me the matter was settled. The clerk told me Thomas, may he rest, had been confused at the end. The clerk did not look me in the eye when he said it. Another pause. Thomas was not confused. Thomas was the least confused man I have ever known. She turned around. She looked at Astrid. I have a grown son in Bismarck, David. He has his own family now. He sends money every month. He wants me to come live with him. I won't. This was Thomas's land. It is mine now. I am not leaving it. She paused. I am going to help you. Not because I think you are right. I am going to help you because I have been waiting 8 years for a chance to watch that man be wrong about something. She walked to the hook by the door. She took down a man's coat, wool, worn thin at the elbows. A coat that had been Thomas Thorne's once and was now Hester's. She put it on with the practiced efficiency of a woman who dressed for work. Drink your coffee. Yes, ma'am. Then we'll go look at your hole. They reached the Lindqvist property by mid-morning. Hester did not speak much on the walk. When she did speak, it was to ask about specifics. The dimensions of the barn, the pitch of the roof, whether the framing was square, whether Anders had used green lumber or seasoned, whether the cellar door had popped with effort or with ease. Astrid answered each question. She answered carefully. She felt, with each answer, like she was being weighed. By the time they reached the barn, Hester had stopped asking. She just looked at it. She looked at it the way a doctor looks at a patient. Then she walked inside, took the lantern from Astrid's hand without asking, and walked over to the cellar opening. She did not go down. Not yet. She knelt at the edge. She lowered the lantern into the hole. She looked. She looked for a long time. Astrid stood behind her and did not breathe. Finally, Hester said, "Help me up." Astrid helped her up. Hester's knees cracked. She stood. She brushed the dirt off her coat. She looked at Astrid. "It's a real cellar." "Yes. Built by a man who knew what he was doing. Lars Holgersen. I never knew him. Heard he gave up. People said he was weak. I am revising that opinion." She walked the lantern around the perimeter of the cellar opening. "We're going to have to go down. You first. I'm not going down those steps until I know they hold." "Yes, ma'am." The steps held. Of course they held. They had been dug into the earth and faced with stone by a man who had built things he meant to last. She stood at the bottom and lifted the lantern. She heard Hester come down behind her. The sound of the older woman's boots on the stone steps, the small grunt of effort, the soft impact at the bottom. Then, a long silence. Astrid turned. Hester was standing on the stone floor of the cellar with her hand on the wall and her head tilted back, looking up at the brick arch of the ceiling. Her face had changed. It was not the face of a 60-year-old widow who had agreed reluctantly to help a girl who did not know what she was doing. It was the face of a woman seeing her own kitchen through a window after a long absence. It was recognition. "My grandmother," Hester said, quietly, to the ceiling. "My grandmother in Pennsylvania had a cellar like this, smaller, same shape, same kind of arch. We'd put up apples in it. The apples would still be sweet in March." She lowered her hand. She turned to Astrid. Her eyes were bright. "I haven't thought about that cellar in 50 years. She wiped her eyes once, quickly, like she was wiping a smudge off a window. She got back to work. She walked the cellar slowly. She touched every wall. She tapped the brick of the ceiling with the handle of the trowel she had brought in her coat pocket. She tapped it the way a doctor taps a chest. Listening. She moved corner to corner. When she got to the northeast corner, she stopped. She crouched. She ran her finger along a line in the stones where the mortar had failed. "Here's your problem." I saw it. "How wide?" "About 20 inches across, 18 inches up and down." "That's right. The stones haven't shifted. The arch is holding them. The water's not coming up from below, it's coming through the soil behind. That's good." "That's good? It's the difference between something we can fix and something we can't." She straightened up. "Here's what we need: clay, sand, lime." "Where do I find clay?" "South of your property. Walk the creek until you see the bank turn red. Dig there, it's not complicated. Bring buckets." "How much?" "As much as you can carry. Then twice that." "Sand. You have sand. I saw it in your barn. Anders had a pile of it for the floor planks he never laid. Use his." She did not soften the never laid. She did not pretend it had not happened. She used the past tense the way a doctor uses it. Cleanly. "Lime?" "I have lime. I'll bring it tomorrow." "At dawn?" "At dawn. Have the clay dug by then." She started up the steps. Halfway up she stopped. She turned. She looked down at Astrid in the lantern light. "Child." "Yes." "This is going to be the hardest thing you have ever done." "Yes, ma'am. There will be a day, maybe a night, when your hands are bleeding and your back will not straighten and you will think you cannot get up. On that day, I want you to remember what you told me at my kitchen table." "Yes, ma'am, because I am not going to remind you. I am not your mother. I am going to expect you to do what you said you would do." "Yes, ma'am." "All right, then." She climbed out. She mounted the dun horse she had ridden over. She rode north. She did not say goodbye. She did not say good luck. She said dawn. "Have the clay." Astrid found the clay where Hester had said. The bank turned red half a mile south, a deep rust seam in the soil at a bend in the creek. She filled the first bucket. The clay was dense and slick, and it weighed more than she had expected. She walked it back to the barn. She emptied it into Anders's old wash tub. She walked back to the creek. By the third trip, her arms had gone past pain into a generalized trembling. Her hands had stopped being separate fingers and had become two clumsy hot mittens. By the fourth trip, she stopped thinking about anything except the next step. By the fifth, she stopped thinking at all. By the sixth, she sat down in the barn for 15 minutes before she could carry the last load down into the cellar. The sun was low. The sky had gone the deep bruised orange of a Dakota October sunset that knows it is the last of its kind. She lay on the barn floor on her back with her arms flung out, and she stared at the rafters. She thought, "I cannot do this for 30 more days." She thought, "I have to do this for 30 more days." She thought, Anders would have laughed at me right now. Not a mean laugh. The other kind. The laugh he had used when she had tried to lift the kettle off the stove with her bare hand the first week of their marriage, and burned her palm in a perfect circle. The laugh that had ended with him holding her hand under the cold pump and saying, "You are very smart, Elskling, and you also do this." She started to laugh. She started to laugh on the barn floor, and she could not stop. She laughed until the laugh became a different sound. She laughed until she was crying. She cried for 10 minutes on the dirt floor of a barn that had been her husband's and was now hers, with her hands raw and her arms numb. Then she got up. She went into the cabin. She put oats on the stove. She ate them standing up. She slept 4 hours. Hester arrived at dawn with a sack of lime powder balanced across her saddle. She looked at Astrid's face. She did not say anything. She just put down the lime. They worked. For 4 days they worked. The process was specific and unforgiving. Hester mixed the mortar by hand in a wooden trough. Lime, sand, water. The proportions she adjusted by feel rather than by measurement. Astrid asked, the first day, what the proportions were. Hester held up a palm gray with mix and said, "This is the proportion, child. Your eyes will learn it, or they won't." Astrid's eyes learned it, slowly, imperfectly. But by the third day she could see, just looking at the trough, when the mix was too wet. Astrid packed the clay behind the damaged section of wall. She pressed it into the gap between the stones and the soil with a flat board, forcing it into every crevice until the seepage slowed from a trickle to a weep to a damp stain to nothing. Then Hester worked the mortar. She troweled it into the joints between the stones with a rhythm that was almost musical. Each joint filled. Each surface struck smooth. Each excess scraped clean before it could set unevenly. She worked the way old women cook, without rush, without waste. The cold was the enemy. Mortar that froze before it cured would crumble by spring. Hester solved this with a method that was brutal and simple. She had Astrid build a small fire in a metal bucket at the base of the wall. Just enough heat to keep the air around the curing mortar above freezing. The fire had to be tended through the night. Astrid slept in 2-hour intervals, in the cellar, on a mattress she had dragged down from the cabin, waking to feed the bucket fire, checking the mortar with her bare hand, adding fuel. On the third night, Hester stayed late. They sat together in the cellar by the bucket fire. The smoke rose through the stairwell into the barn above. Hester reached into her coat pocket. She produced a glass jar. She unscrewed the lid with her broad, cracked fingers. She offered the jar. Inside were pears, halved, translucent, floating in their own pale syrup. From August. They look beautiful. They are beautiful. I am not modest about my pears. She handed Astrid a fork. They ate from the jar. In the underground silence, the only sound was the small crackle of the bucket fire and the distant settle of the barn timbers in the cold above. Astrid said, "Tell me about Thomas." She had not planned to ask. It just came out. Hester did not look up from the jar. She speared a pear half on the fork. She ate it slowly. Thomas was a quiet man, quieter than I am. People thought I married him because I needed someone to listen, and I will admit there was a piece of that. But mostly I married him because he had the kindest hands I had ever seen. You can't fake hands. A man's mouth will lie. His hands, you can read. How long were you married? 26 years. And then a horse went over a fence wrong, and Thomas was on the wrong side of the horse, and the horse stood up and Thomas didn't, and that was the end of 26 years. A pause. It is 26 years, and then it is no years. Just like that. The clock keeps going. The day keeps coming up. But you are walking around inside your own house, and you don't remember which side of the bed is yours. Yes, you will know what I mean. I know what you mean. I know you do, child. I knew the minute you walked up to my door. Hester ate another pear. She offered the jar again. Astrid took one. She ate it slowly. The pear was sweet in the way only home-canned fruit is sweet. Hester said quietly, "The pain doesn't go away. People will tell you it goes away. It doesn't. It just finds a place to sit down inside you." Astrid did not answer. She did not have to. The bucket fire popped. The cellar held its small warmth. On the morning of the 4th day, Hester pressed her thumb into the mortar joint, and the mortar held. She nodded once. The closest thing to celebration Astrid would ever see from her. Wall's good. Wall's good. Now you do the floor. She taught Astrid the floor. This was the heart of the design, the component that turned the cellar from a shelter into a system. Most people think stone is cold. Stone isn't cold. Stone is patient. It takes whatever temperature you give it, holds it, gives it back slowly. A floor of dense stone, properly heated, becomes a stove that burns no fuel. It just remembers. Granite or sandstone. Granite. Sandstone gives up heat too fast. Granite holds. Where do I get granite? Walk your west fence line. You're sitting on enough granite to build a cathedral. The glaciers did the work. You only have to carry. She left that afternoon. At the edge of the property, she turned in the saddle. You won't see me for 2 days. I have my own place to keep. Yes, ma'am. Lay your insulation, straw. Then start with the heaviest stones. Work outward. Yes, ma'am. Don't try to lift what you can't lift. Yes, ma'am. Astrid. It was the first time she had used the name. Yes, eat. Even when you don't want to. Eat. Yes, ma'am. The west fence line was a meandering low wall of glacial granite. Lars Holgersson had built it. Anders had not maintained it. The stones ranged from the size of a loaf of bread to the size of a butter churn. The smaller ones, Astrid carried. The larger ones she loaded onto the small handcart Anders had built for hauling fence materials. She loaded them 2 at a time. She dragged the cart across the yard. Inside the barn, she lowered each stone into the cellar using a rope sling she fashioned from the coil she'd found in Lars Holgersson's old crate. She braced the rope against the edge of the cellar opening. She used her body weight to control the descent. It was the hardest physical work she had ever done. It was harder than the clay. It was harder than the digging. It was a kind of labor that existed beyond the range of what she had understood her body to be capable of. A frontier of effort that kept expanding just enough to accommodate one more trip, one more stone. Her hands cracked open at the base of every finger. She wrapped them in strips torn from an old shirt and kept working. Her back developed a localized pain between her shoulder blades that woke her each morning before dawn. She laid the stones over a bed of dry straw, with the spacing Hester had taught her. Tight, not mortared. The gaps no wider than a knife blade. 4 days. It took her 4 days to finish the floor. On the 12th of November, Jonah Beckett rode onto her property. He came alone. He came on a horse he had pushed too hard. He did not come to the barn. He tied his horse at the cabin fence and knocked on the cabin door. The cabin had been cold for days. The chimney had not produced smoke since the 5th. When no one answered, he stood in the yard and looked. He looked at the cabin, at the cold chimney. He looked at the barn, at the mound of excavated dirt beside it, at the fresh cart track between the west fence line and the barn door. Astrid watched him from inside the barn through the gap between 2 wall boards. Her hands were wrapped in bloody cloth. Her hair was tied back with a piece of rope. She had not bathed properly in 8 days. She was standing next to a hole in the floor that led to a room full of carefully laid granite. She looked, she was certain, exactly like the kind of person Cyrus Wendell would describe as having lost her mind. She stepped into the doorway before Jonah could enter. He removed his hat. Mrs. Lindqvist, Mr. Beckett, I came to tell you something. I don't have to. All right. Mr. Wendell doesn't know I'm here. I prefer to keep it that way. All right. He looked past her into the barn. He saw the dirt, the cart, the opening in the floor. He did not ask. To his credit, he did not ask. Mr. Wendell filed a preliminary notice of abandonment with the territorial clerk on the 3rd. If he can demonstrate that you are not actively residing on the property, no smoke from the chimney, no evidence of daily habitation, he can petition for early recovery of the land. The abandonment statute does not require your consent. It requires evidence. She was quiet. Why are you telling me this? He put his hat back on. Because Mr. Wendell did the same thing to my brother's family in '82. My brother went to Bismarck for a week to find work. When he came back, the abandonment notice had already been filed. And what happened to your brother? Drank himself to death by '85. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say. Jonah looked at the ground. I do not have a quarrel with you, Mrs. Lindqvist. I want land. I do not want someone else's misfortune. He mounted his horse at the fence line. He turned back. Light a fire in the cabin every morning, even a small one, just enough for smoke. He rode east. He did not wait for thanks. She did not give any. From that morning forward, she lit a fire in the cabin every day at dawn. Just enough wood to produce smoke. Just enough smoke to prove she existed. Then she would close the damper, cross the yard, enter the barn, descend. It was a performance. The cabin was a set. The cellar was the life. Reverend Crane came on the 14th. He was a man who wore his kindness like a well-tailored coat, visible, deliberate, fitting closely over a frame of deep conservatism. He found Astrid in the cellar. She was standing on the completed stone floor. He came down the last 2 steps. He stood on the granite. He registered visibly the absence of biting cold. Child, Reverend, this is remarkable work, but it is not a home, Astrid. It is a cellar. A person cannot live in a cellar. I am not asking to live in a cellar forever. The body survives, perhaps. The spirit requires light, air, the company of others. I am asking to live until April. I worry about what this solitude is doing to you. It is keeping me alive. She set down her measuring cord. She looked at him directly. Mr. Wendell came to see you. He paused. Yes. He used the word fragile. He phrased it more delicately. He suggested grief had affected my judgment. He used the word irrational. He is building a case. Astrid. First it was abandonment. Now it is incompetence. If he cannot take the land because I left it, he will take it because I am not sane enough to keep it. The Reverend opened his mouth. He closed it. He chose different words than the ones he had prepared. I did not come here to serve Mr. Wendell's purpose. I believe you. I came because I care about your welfare. I believe that too. Then please, tell him I am perfectly sane, Reverend. Tell him I am perfectly competent. Tell him I will be here on the 1st of December to tell him so myself. He climbed the stairs slowly. At the top, he paused. I will pray for you, Astrid. Pray for warmer stone. That would be more useful. He left. His boot prints in the frost outside the barn pointed east. On the 17th of November, Hester fell. She had come that morning to inspect the mortar's cure and to advise Astrid on the next phase. The ventilation, the flue, the angled trench for the southern window. They were walking from the barn toward the west fence line when Hester's boot caught a patch of black ice hidden under a skim of blown snow. She went down hard on her right side. The sound that came from her wrist was a small, distinct crack. It carried in the cold air with terrible clarity. Astrid was at her side in 3 strides. Hester sat on the frozen ground, cradling her right arm, her face the color of old paper. She did not cry out. That's broken. Hester, help me up, child. The ground is cold. Astrid helped her up. She walked her slowly across the yard to the cabin. She splinted the wrist with 2 flat pieces of firewood and a strip of cotton. Hester sat at the table, her left hand flat on the surface, her right arm held against her chest, her eyes closed. You will need to send word to David in Bismarck. He will come for me. Hester, don't. The word was sharp enough to cut. Don't say what you are about to say. I know what this means. I can see you counting the days in your head. I wasn't going to say that. You were thinking it. That is the same thing with better manners. Hester opened her eyes. The pain was there, layered beneath something harder. The wall is done. The floor is done. What's left is the ventilation, the flue, the window trench, the platform for the rendering pot. You know how to do all of it. I taught you. The question is whether you can do it alone in 2 weeks. I can. She said it. She did not know if it was true. Hester looked at her for a long time. Then she stood, carefully. She walked to the door. I believe you can. I also believe this is the stupidest, bravest thing I have seen anyone attempt in 30 years on this prairie." She stepped outside. She turned in the doorway. "Send for David." "Yes, ma'am. I will be back when this heals." "Yes, ma'am." "If you are still alive." She walked north, her broken wrist held against her coat, her silhouette shrinking against a pale white sky, until the landscape absorbed her. Astrid stood in the yard. She allowed herself exactly 5 minutes of the terror she had been holding at arm's length. 5 minutes. She counted them on the cabin clock. Then she picked up the shovel and went back to work on the southern trench. The trench was the most labor-intensive piece of the remaining construction. The journal specified an angled excavation on the southern side, sloping downward from ground level to the cellar wall, deep enough to seat a glazed surface, window glass, laid nearly flat, to capture the low winter sun. The angle was critical, 22 degrees from horizontal, too steep, and the rays would pass over the glass instead of penetrating, too shallow, and snow would pile on the surface. She dug for 4 days. The ground was half frozen at the surface, hard as concrete for the first 4 inches. Then, yielding to a dense cold clay, her shovel cut in thin slices. Each shovel load had to be carried up and out. Each day began in darkness and ended in darkness. She ate standing up, spooning cold oats from a tin cup. She slept in the cellar, on the stone floor that was not yet charged with heat, wrapped in every blanket she owned. On the 4th day of digging, she reached the cellar's south wall. She used Anders's saw and a cold chisel from Lars Holgersson's crate. She opened a hole through the original stone foundation, the dimensions dictated by Anders's window sashes. The 2 beautiful double-paned sashes with brass hardware that Anders had ordered last spring for the house he was going to build around them. She unwrapped them on the 22nd. She held the first one up to the light. The glass was clean. The brass hardware glinted. She held it for a long time. She thought, "You were going to put this in our window, Anders." She thought, "You were going to put this in the wall above our bed." She thought, "I am going to put it in the ground." She thought, "I am going to lay you in the ground twice, once in the box, once in the glass." She did not cry. She did not have time. She built a wooden frame from barn lumber. She seated the sashes at 22 degrees. She packed the joints with clay and straw. When the sun rose the next morning and hit the glass at the correct angle, a broad parallelogram of golden light appeared on the cellar floor for the first time. It moved slowly across the granite as the sun tracked west, warming each stone it touched. By late afternoon, the stones that had been in direct sun were perceptibly warm. She sat on the floor in the fading light. She pressed her palms flat against the warm granite. The heat was mild, but it was real. It was stored sunlight, captured through glass, held in stone. She put her face down on the warm floor. She let her cheek rest on it. For 1 minute, she let herself believe. She cleared the old flue on the 24th. A full day of choking, claustrophobic work. Lying on her back, pulling out decades of debris with her bare hands. When she finally cleared the last obstruction, she felt a faint but unmistakable draft. She sealed the bottom of the flue with a damper made from a flat stone and a leather hinge. Then came the rendering pot, the massive cast-iron cauldron that sat in the barn like a monument to a life that had been planned and not completed. Moving it was not possible. She built around it, using the remaining barn timber, heavy beams from the framing. She constructed a platform beside the cellar opening. She rolled the pot onto the platform using 2 round logs as rollers, a technique she found in Lars Holgersson's notebook, described in his cramped practical handwriting, the way to move anything heavier than yourself. Don't carry it. Convince it to travel. Above the pot, she cut a 6-inch hole in the barn roof. Below it, she left a corresponding opening in the cellar ceiling. On the 26th of November, she was ready for the first test. She filled the rendering pot with scrap, broken fence rails, small branches. She lit the fire with hands that shook. The wood caught. Flames climbed the inside of the iron pot. Within minutes, the massive vessel began to change. The black iron grew dark red at the base, then brighter, the color climbing the sides like a slow tide of captured light. Smoke poured upward through the roof hole. The heat went down. She descended the cellar stairs. She stood beneath the opening. A column of hot air pressed against her upturned face, dry, powerful, smelling of iron and burning wood. She kept the fire burning for 3 hours. When the flames finally died and she sealed the cellar opening with a heavy stone slab she had prepared, she sat on her bed in the underground dark and waited. The temperature climbed, 50, 55, 60. Over the next 2 hours, the cellar stabilized at 63 degrees. Not blasting, not aggressive, an ambient, even warmth that came from below, from the floor, from every surface, the way sunlight warms a stone wall in summer. She lay on her mattress that night. She felt the stored heat rising through the floor beneath her, a warmth so steady and so quiet it felt like something the earth had been saving, for whoever thought to ask. On the 29th, the rendering pot cracked. The temperature outside had dropped to 25 below zero overnight. The barn timbers popped in the cold with sounds like distant gunshots. Astrid had built the fire in the pot at dusk, as usual. But the thermal shock found the hairline flaw that had been invisible in the casting. It split the pot along a seam from rim to base, a single, irreversible fracture. She heard it from below, a sound like a large bell being struck off key. She climbed the stairs. She found the pot cracked open, the fire dying. She stood in the cold barn and stared. 2 days before the deadline, the temperature outside lethal. She went back down into the cellar. She opened the journal. She read the section on heat charging for the 5th time. Then she looked at the 2 smaller cast iron pots that sat against the cellar wall, a Dutch oven, a deep skillet. Together, they held perhaps a quarter of the volume of the rendering pot. Individually, they were manageable. She carried them upstairs. She built 2 small platforms, one on each side of the cellar opening. She set the pots on them. She built separate small fires in each. The heat output was a fraction of what the rendering pot had provided, but it was concentrated. 2 narrow columns of radiant warmth pouring down into the stone floor from 2 points instead of 1. She ran both fires for 4 hours. The cellar stabilized at 60. Adequate. She would need to fire them every 2 days instead of every 3. She would burn more wood. The margin was thinner. The system held. On the morning of the 1st of December, she woke in the cellar at 5. The stone floor radiated its patient warmth into the still air. She dressed in the dark. Anders's wool shirt, her own wool skirt, the heavy coat, the scarf. She climbed the stairs, crossed the barn, went to the cabin. She built a real fire in the cabin hearth. She fed it 3 full logs. She put water on to boil. She swept the floor. She opened the shutters. She let the thin winter light enter the room. Then she sat at the table. She waited. She heard the horse at 10. He came alone this time. No deputy, no Beckett, just Cyrus Wendell, dismounting heavily, his breath pluming in the frigid air. She was not in the cabin. She was in the barn. She was sitting on a wooden stool she had brought up from the cellar, her coat unbuttoned despite the cold, her grandmother's journal calm in her lap. She had positioned the stool directly over the sealed cellar opening. The stone slab beneath her feet was radiating warmth she could feel through her boots. She was waiting for him. She had been waiting for him since the moment he first stood on her porch in October. He entered the barn. He looked at her, sitting on the stool, with the journal, calm in a way that was not performed, but actual. He stopped. He did not say anything. She did not say anything either. Outside, the wind picked up. It carried something metallic, a new edge. But it was December. December was not the storm. December was only the test before the test. The real winter was still ahead. Cyrus Wendell stood in the doorway of the barn and did not move. He had rehearsed his entrance. He had rehearsed it on the ride out. past the bend in the road, past the broken windmill on the Hanson place, the place where he had taken the land in '83 and felt nothing about it, past the long stretch of nothing that was the country between his office and her property. He had rehearsed firmness. He had rehearsed sympathy. He had rehearsed the small, careful expression of a man who was sorry to be the bearer of an inevitable thing. None of it survived the doorway, because she was sitting on a stool, in a cold barn, in her dead husband's coat, with a leather journal in her lap. And she was warm. He could see it. The way her cheeks were not blue. The way her breath was not pluming the way his was. The barn floor underneath her feet was radiating heat. He could feel it from 12 feet away. He had built houses in this territory for 19 years. He had never felt heat coming up from a barn floor in December. Mrs. Lindqvist, Mr. Wendell, you are still here. I told you I would be. He held the satchel against his ribs. 4 times. He had carried this satchel here 4 times. He thought, why does that number sound like a verdict? He stepped further inside. He stopped at the edge of where the warmth started. It started in a circle. He could feel it as he crossed an invisible line. The way a cold man feels the door of a saloon, a change in the air at the threshold. She watched him register it. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She just watched him cross the line. Mrs. Lindqvist. Yes. I have come on the date we agreed upon. You have. I am here to collect your signature. I know why you are here, Mr. Wendell. I have known for 35 days. He paused. He had prepared for tears. He had prepared for shouting. He had prepared for the slow, quiet collapse of a young woman who had been bluffing. He had not prepared for this. The straight back. The voice that was not soft and not hard. The voice of a person stating the time on a clock. I have watched 14 families try to survive what is coming, Mrs. Lindqvist. The ones who succeeded did it with fire and timber and iron the way I told them. The ones who failed. The ones who failed. He did not finish the sentence. She finished it for him. Are dead, Mr. Wendell. He looked at her. Yes. Or gone east, with your money in their pockets, pretending it was a choice. That is not. It is. That is not fair. It is not unfair. His jaw worked. She watched the muscles at the hinge of his mandible, the flex of a man processing information that did not fit into any category he had built. Show me, he said. Show you. Whatever it is, whatever you have done, I want to see it. She closed the journal. She stood up. She set the journal carefully on the upturned bucket she had placed beside her. She bent down, gripped the iron ring in the floor, and pulled. The heavy slab slid sideways with a low scrape. A column of warm air rose into the cold barn. It rose past her face. It rose past his. It rose like the breath of something that had been holding its breath. He stared down into the opening. He could not speak. He could see the granite floor. He could see the repaired wall. He could see the small bed with its quilts. The provisions stacked along the far wall. The candle in the brass holder. Anders Lindqvist's brown wool coat hanging on an iron hook. The window cut into the south foundation, with the late morning sun coming through it in a slanted gold parallelogram. A small, complete, functional world, 10 feet below the surface of a prairie that was trying to kill everything on it. He looked at this for what felt to him like a long time. He looked at it the way a man looks at a thing his wife has been trying to tell him about for years. Then he looked at her. Who built this? I did. Who helped you? Hester Thorne. His face changed. It was the second time in his life that the name Hester Thorne had changed his face. The first time had been across a crowded harvest social, when she had turned her back to him. He looked back into the cellar. You and a 60-year-old woman. Yes. Built this. Yes. In 35 days. 34. The first day was burying my husband. The words came out evenly. She did not say them as a slap. She said them as arithmetic. He took a step back. He had been holding the satchel against his ribs. He was holding it now in front of him, like something he did not know what to do with. Mrs. Lindqvist. Yes, this is. He stopped. He started again. This is unconventional. Yes, it does not change the deadline. I did not ask it to. It does not change the debt. I did not ask it to. It does not change the fact that you are alone here. A woman of 21, with winter still ahead of you. The hardest weeks have not yet come. No, Mr. Wendell, they have not. She let that sit. She let it sit because it was true. December was not the test. January was the test. He did not look at her for a moment. He looked at the cellar. Then he did something she had not expected. He opened the satchel. He took out the deed transfer document. He looked at the unsigned line. He folded the paper in half. He folded it in half again. He did not tear it. She watched him. She wondered what was wrong with him. He was supposed to tear it. He did not tear it. He put it back in the satchel. He buckled the satchel. I will return. You said that on the 1st of November. I will return after the first real storm. There has not been a storm yet. No, but the storm I am thinking of is coming. You know it. I know it. This. He gestured into the cellar. This is impressive. I will not pretend it is not. But this is November's storm. December has not happened yet. January has not happened yet. There are storms that come through this country that do not negotiate with anyone. Especially women, you mean? I did not say that. No, you said anyone. You meant women. His jaw worked. He turned to leave. She let him. He paused at the barn door. He looked at her, without the satchel in front of him. Mrs. Lindqvist. Yes, I hope I am wrong. He said it quietly. She did not know, in that moment, whether to believe him. She would not know for 6 more weeks whether to believe him. He mounted his horse. He rode east. She watched him until he was small. She watched him until he was gone. Then she went down into the cellar. She closed the slab above her. The warmth rose from the floor and the candle did not flicker. She lay on her bed. She stared at the brick of the ceiling. She thought, December has not happened yet. She thought January has not happened yet. She thought, all right. She thought, all right then. December came. It came the way December comes to the northern plains, in increments. The temperature dropping a degree, 2 degrees, 5 degrees, until the prairie itself seemed to contract. Astrid lived underground. She lived by the rhythm of the floor. Every second day she climbed the stairs at dawn, built fires in the 2 small cast-iron pots, and tended them for 4 hours. The rest of the time she stayed below. She cooked oat porridge on a small alcohol stove. She read. The trunk in the cabin had held 4 books, a collection of essays by Emerson, an almanac from 1885, a novel about a family on the Kansas frontier, a small volume of poetry her sister had given her. She brought them all underground. She rationed them the way she rationed food. The light through the southern window became the metronome of her days. It entered the cellar each morning as a pale, narrow blade, tracked slowly across the granite floor until mid-afternoon, then retreated, leaving the stones it had touched perceptibly warmer than those it hadn't. She thought about Anders constantly, but the thinking had changed. In the first weeks after his death, memory had been a knife. Now, living inside the structure his lumber had framed, sleeping above a floor she had built with stone from a wall he had started, the thinking had become less like bleeding and more like archaeology. She was excavating him, finding the outlines of the life he had planned. The barn was his blueprint. The cellar was her revision. She found the iron hook on the cellar wall on a Tuesday in late December. It had probably been installed by Lars Holgersson. It had been there for a decade, doing nothing. She hung Anders's coat on it, the brown wool coat he had worn the day he rode to Wendell's office to sign the extension papers. The coat she had kept folded in the trunk since September. She hung it where she could see it from the bed, where the morning light through the windows would catch the fabric each day. She wrote a letter to her mother on Christmas Day. She sat on the bed with a board across her knees as a desk. She described the cellar. She described the stone floor. She described the light. She described Hester. She did not describe Cyrus except as a man who held the note on the property. She did not describe her fear. She did not send the letter. She folded it, placed it between the pages of the poetry book. The letter existed not as communication, but as evidence. Proof that she had been here. The temperature dropped through December like a stone falling through water. 10 below, 15, 20. On the 28th of December, a thermometer at Hendrick's store in town read 32 below zero, a number that existed beyond the boundary of cold as most people understood it. In the cellar, Astrid's floor held at 59 on its low cycle, 62 on its high. She slept under 2 quilts. She was not warm the way a person sitting beside a roaring stove is warm. She was warm the way a person sleeping in a well-insulated bed is warm. Her wood consumption was a fraction of what any cabin on the prairie required, while her neighbors fed their stoves around the clock, burning through cords of carefully stacked oak at a rate that made the winter feel like a furnace with a mouth. Astrid's system ran on the thermal equivalent of loose change, 2 small fires every other day, burning scrap lumber and brush for 4 hours each. The system did not depend on continuous combustion. It depended on stone, en masse, on the patient physics of a material that absorbed heat and released it on a schedule governed by molecular structure rather than human urgency. January arrived without ceremony. The deep cold did not relent. It intensified. The wind shifted from its usual westerly pattern to a sustained northern flow that carried air directly from the Canadian plains. The community contracted. Travel ceased. Families that had laid in what they considered adequate supplies began to ration. Families that had not were in immediate danger. Astrid received no visitors in January. The road past her property was impassable. She saw no one. She heard nothing except the wind above. She spoke to Anders's coat sometimes, not in conversation. She had not lost that grip on reality. But in the brief, direct way, a person speaks to an object that represents a person. Good morning. Terrible wind today. She spoke to herself more frequently. She narrated her own actions. I am lighting the stove now. I am opening the flue. It was not madness. It was maintenance. The upkeep of a self that might otherwise have drifted into the vast, featureless quiet of January underground. On the morning of the 12th of January, she woke to a silence that was different from the silence she had become accustomed to. The wind had stopped. Not diminished, not shifted. Stopped. The barn timbers above her, which had been vibrating with the sustained pressure of moving air for weeks, were suddenly absolutely still. The absence of the vibration was more unsettling than the vibration itself. She climbed the stairs and pushed the slab aside. The barn was cold, bitterly, deeply, in a way that felt different from the previous weeks. The air had a crystalline quality, as though each molecule of oxygen had been individually frozen. She walked to the barn door and looked out. The sky was wrong. It was the color of a bruise that had not yet decided whether it would heal or worsen. A yellow-gray that sat low over the landscape, pressing down with a weight that was almost physical. The horizon had disappeared. The line where land met sky had been erased. The world looked sealed. She had never seen a sky this color. She did not need to have seen it before to understand what it meant. The body has an older vocabulary than the mind for certain kinds of danger. She heard hoofbeats, fast, from the east. Jonah Beckett materialized out of the yellow-gray distance like a figure emerging from a photograph that was still developing. He was riding hard. He reached the edge of her property, pulled the horse to a stop, looked at the sky. Then he looked at the barn, at Astrid standing in the doorway. Their eyes met across 60 yards of frozen ground. He did not dismount. He did not speak. He held her gaze for 3 seconds, then wheeled his horse and spurred it east, riding with the urgency of a man who had calculated how much time remained and found the number insufficient. Astrid watched him disappear. She understood the message his silence had delivered. Whatever is coming, it is coming now. and I cannot help you." She went back inside the barn. She built fires in both small pots using the last of the scrap lumber she had stockpiled. She charged the floor for 2 hours instead of the usual 4, because 2 hours was what she had. She sealed the pots. She carried an armload of brush down into the cellar as emergency fuel. She pulled the slab closed above her. She waited. The storm arrived at approximately 1 in the afternoon, though the word arrived implies a process that was entirely inadequate for what actually occurred. The blizzard did not arrive. It detonated. One moment the world was silent, the yellow-gray sky pressing down. The next moment, the world ceased to exist and was replaced by a horizontal wall of white, moving at a velocity that registered not as wind, but as impact. The barn shuddered. The timbers above the cellar groaned. The temperature collapsed. She could feel it even underground. A plunge so violent it seemed to have physical force. Above, the storm was doing things to the prairie that would not be fully understood until it was over. The sound was the worst part. A high, oscillating shriek produced by fine, dry snow being driven horizontally at 50 miles an hour. It was the sound of a world being sandpapered down to its foundations. Astrid sat on her bed with her back against the stone wall, her quilts wrapped around her shoulders, the journal in her lap. The candle flame did not move. The air in the cellar was so still, so insulated from the chaos above, that the flame burned perfectly vertical, a small, unwavering point of light in a universe of howling darkness. The temperature on her floor read 57. Livable. The granite was giving back the heat she had charged it with that morning. She was lonely. She was tired. Her hands ached. But she was also calm, with a calm born not of hope but of completed preparation. Fear requires uncertainty. She had spent 3 months eliminating every uncertainty she could reach. The wall was mortared. The floor was laid. The system was tested. Either the cellar held or it didn't. She had done everything within the capacity of her body and her knowledge. She opened the journal. She turned to the last page Helga Bergstrom had written in. She read it. "Do not be ashamed of the earth. Men build upward because they are proud. They build toward the sky because they believe height is strength. But the deepest foundations are the ones that remember what the surface forgets." She closed the journal. She listened. She waited. 7 miles east, Cyrus Wendell was losing his war. The Monarch stove was running at full capacity. The stovepipe glowed a dull orange. It was not enough. The stove produced a sphere of fierce heat with a radius of perhaps 8 feet. Inside the sphere, it was bearable. Outside, the temperature dropped with a gradient so steep it felt like crossing a border. The parlor, 12 feet from the stove, was 45. The kitchen, 20 feet, was 38. The bedrooms at the back of the house were below freezing. Eliza Wendell had pulled the mattresses from the bedrooms. She had laid them on the floor near the stove. Wesley, 8 years old, sat closest to the iron, with a blanket over his head. Tess, 5, was in her mother's arms. Tess had been coughing for 3 days. The cough had a wet rattle that Eliza did not like. Cyrus sat in the chair nearest the stove. He was thinking about the woodpile. He had laid in what he had calculated, for 19 years, to be sufficient. 4 cords of split oak. Sufficient for a standard winter, in a house built to the standard he had set. This storm was not standard. He had burned through 3 cords already. The remaining cord was disappearing at a rate he could no longer pretend was sustainable. 20 hours. Maybe. The storm had been blowing for 16. It showed no indication of stopping. Eliza spoke. She spoke for the first time in 2 hours. "Cyrus." "Yes." "Do you think she's alive?" He looked at his wife. He looked at her over the head of his sleeping daughter. "The Lindqvist woman." "Yes, I do not know. You saw what she built." "I saw it." "You came home and you did not tell me." "No." "Why?" He did not answer. She did not ask again. He looked at the stove. He thought, "I have built every house in this county on the principle that you fight the cold." He thought, "I have built fortresses. He thought, fortresses fail when the siege lasts longer than the supply. He thought, she built something that does not need a supply. He thought, the ground was always there. Under every house I built, the ground has always been there. He stood up. Eliza watched him. Cyrus. Yes. What are you doing? I am going to her. Cyrus. I am going to her. Cyrus, you cannot. I have to. You cannot survive that wind. Maybe I cannot. But I cannot stay here, Eliza. I cannot stay here and watch our woodpile disappear knowing where there is heat I will not ask for. He put on his coat, his heaviest coat. He pulled the fur hat down to his eyebrows. He wrapped the wool scarf around the lower half of his face. Eliza shifted Tess to one arm. She reached out with her free hand and gripped his wrist. Come back. Yes. Bring her back. Yes. Be the man I married, Cyrus, not the man you have been. He closed his hand around hers for 1 second. Then he opened the door. The storm hit him like a body. It knocked him sideways into the door frame. He stepped into it. He closed the door behind him. The world he had lived in for 43 years disappeared. He fell within the first 100 yards. He got up. He fell again. The snow under his boots was not a surface. It was a deception. Hard packed in one place, soft and bottomless 2 steps later. He went down on his hands and knees. The cold bit through his gloves instantly. He got up. The wind let up briefly. A short pause, the kind of pause this storm gave to anything still alive in it. He used the pause to get his bearings. He had 2 miles to walk. 2 miles in this was an ocean. He oriented himself by the wind. If he kept the wind on his right cheek, he was walking west, toward the Lindqvist place. He kept the wind on his right cheek. He fell again. He got up. He found the Hansen fence by feel. He had built that fence. He had built it in '83, after the Hansens had defaulted, after he had taken their land. He had built it for the new owner. He found the corner post by the shape of the wire. 19 years of fingers on wire. A builder's hands recognize what eyes cannot provide. He followed the fence south. The wind shifted. He turned. He walked the other way. He found the next post. He kept his right hand on the wire. He did not let go of the wire. He walked for what might have been 20 minutes or might have been 3 hours. He fell a 3rd time. This time he stayed down for a count of 10. This time he thought, I am going to die here. This time he thought, no. Eliza, Tess, Wesley, get up. He got up. He walked. He found the corner where the Hansen fence met the Lindqvist fence. He felt the wire change. The Lindqvist fence had a slightly different gauge. He had noticed it once, in October, and filed the observation away. He blessed the observation. He followed the new wire. He fell again. He got up. He fell again. He got up. He saw the dark shape of the barn, materializing in the white, and he did not believe it. The dark shape did not disappear. He stumbled toward it. The barn door was closed. He could not work the latch with his hands. He pushed his shoulder against it. It gave. He fell through the door. He lay on the packed earth of the barn floor and he gasped. The cold inside the barn was different from the cold outside, still, heavy, not moving. He could not feel his hands. He could not feel his face. He could feel something against his cheek. He turned his head. The barn was lit, very faintly, from below. A glow, a small amber glow at the seam of a stone slab in the floor. Heat. He crawled. His frozen gloves scraped against the stone. He hit it with his fist. The sound was dull, absorbed. He hit it again. Hello. Nothing. Is anyone? Nothing. He hit the slab a 3rd time, a scraping sound from below. The slab shifted sideways. Warm air rose with the force of something that had been contained. A breath the earth had been holding. It washed over his face, his frozen beard, his ice-rimmed eyes. It smelled of earth. It smelled of warm stone. It smelled, very faintly, of something baking. Her face appeared in the opening, lit from below by the candle in her hand. The look of a person seeing a specific outcome materialize that she had considered but had not expected. Mr. Wendell. He could not form a complete sentence. She was wearing a cotton dress. No coat. Her hair was loose on her shoulders. The air rising past her carried the temperature of a mild autumn afternoon. Behind her he could see the cellar, the granite floor, the quilted bed, the south-facing window, dark with storm, but framed with care, the book lying open on the mattress, the brown wool coat hanging on the iron hook. He recognized that coat. He had seen Anders wearing it in March, in his office, on the day Anders had come to negotiate the extension. The collateral visit. The visit that Cyrus had approved, not out of generosity, but because the land was worth more than the debt. The coat was on the wall. Cyrus Wendell was on his knees. "Come down before you freeze to death up there." Her voice carried the same levelness it had carried in every conversation they had ever had. But something was different underneath it, a deliberately, mercifully chosen gentleness. He half fell down the stone steps. He landed on the granite floor of her cellar. The heat that entered his body through his boot soles felt like an answer to a question he had been asking his entire life without knowing he was asking it. He stood, dripping meltwater under her floor, shaking with a violence that was part cold and part the response to something inside him collapsing. "Mrs. Lindqvist." "Yes, my family." "Yes, my house. The fire is not enough. The wood is gone." She looked at him. She did not pause for effect. She said, "Bring them here." He closed his eyes. The words entered him with the warmth of the floor. "Mrs. Lindqvist." "Now, Mr. Wendell, go now, before the storm closes again." He climbed the stairs. He stepped back into the storm. The cold hit him like something personal. But this time he was moving with the particular velocity of a man who knew exactly where warmth was, and had people who needed it. He followed his own track back. The track was almost gone. He found the fence corner. He followed the wire. He fell twice. He got up twice. He burst through his own front door. Eliza looked up from the children on the floor. He could not speak. He gestured. She understood without words. She stood up. She wrapped Tess in 2 blankets. She bundled Wesley into his own coat. Wesley, who was 8 and brave, said only one thing. "Are we going to Mrs. Lindqvist?" Cyrus looked at him. "Yes. Mama said we might." Mama was right. He tied the family together with rope. His own hands. A chain of 4 bodies linked at the waist. A family reduced to its most elemental structure. People who are attached to each other and moving toward heat. They went into the storm. The trip back took longer. Astrid counted the minutes from the moment Cyrus Wendell climbed her stairs the first time to the moment she heard the first knock at the slab. 87 minutes. She would remember that number too. She had been pacing the floor for 50. She had been bargaining with God for 60. She had been preparing herself for the possibility that he had not made it back, that she had sent a man into a storm to bring his family, and the storm had taken him. The knock came. She climbed the stairs. She slid the slab. Cyrus Wendell was on his knees again. This time there were 3 other people behind him. His wife, holding a small child wrapped in blankets. A boy, maybe 8, with his eyes very wide, all of them, white with snow, shaking, alive. Astrid did not say anything. She just reached up and took the small child first. The child was so cold she did not feel like a child. She felt like an idea of a child. Astrid carried her down. She set her on the bed. She unwrapped one of the blankets. The child's face was very pale. She was breathing. She was breathing. That was the only thing that mattered. Eliza came down second, then the boy, then Cyrus. Cyrus closed the slab behind him with the last of his strength. The seal was good. The storm became again a far-off thing. The 5 of them stood in the cellar. 5. For one long moment, nobody spoke. The candle burned straight up. The granite floor radiated. Eliza Wendell was looking at Astrid the way a woman looks at a stranger who has just saved her child's life. She did not say, "Thank you." Thank you was a word for a smaller thing than this. She just held Astrid's eyes. Her own eyes were full. Astrid nodded once. Astrid nodded the way Hester had once nodded to her. She turned to the bed. She picked up the smaller of the 2 extra quilts she had stitched in November. She wrapped the little girl in it. She tucked the corners under the small body. She put her palm against the child's cheek. She felt the cold start, very slowly, to leave it. That night, the Wendells slept on the floor of Astrid's cellar. Eliza on a folded coat, with Tess curled against her chest. Wesley beside her, his small hand still gripping his mother's sleeve, even in sleep. Cyrus did not sleep. He sat on a wooden crate in the corner. He sat with his back against the cool stone wall. He sat with his elbows on his knees and his head low. The candle between him and Astrid threw their shadows large on the stone walls. She sat on the floor opposite him, her back against the south wall. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the breathing of 3 sleeping people and the distant, muffled roar of a storm that could no longer reach them. He spoke first. His voice was quiet. It was a voice she had not heard from him before. 14 families. She did not answer. I told myself each one was a resolution, clean, fair. The railroad held the notes the settlers couldn't pay. I facilitated the transfer. He paused. No one ever ended up where they belonged. They ended up where I put them. She looked at him in the candlelight. She did not say, "I forgive you." She did not say, "I understand." She said, "I am not going to say that I forgive you, Mr. Wendell. I know. Forgiveness is God's work. I do not have that work. I have my own work. My work tonight was to not let your daughter die. That is the work I chose. It is not the same as forgiveness." He nodded. He nodded slowly. "I understand." "Do you?" "I am beginning to." A long pause. "Mrs. Lindqvist." "Yes. When this is over, if we are still alive when this is over, I will go to the railroad office in Bismarck. I will restructure the note. I will pay back what I took from Hester Thorne's husband. I will go to every family I pushed off their land. I will not pretend it is enough. It is not enough. It is not enough. I know. It is a beginning." He nodded. "It is a beginning." The candle guttered. She did not light another one. The dark filled the corners of the room. The storm above them continued. The earth around them continued, at its own temperature, at its own pace. The storm lasted 3 days. On the 4th morning, the wind died with the abruptness of a machine being switched off. A silence descended on the territory so absolute it had physical properties. The sky cleared to a blue so deep it looked artificial. Astrid pushed the slab open and climbed into a world she did not recognize. The barn was standing. The drifts reached the eaves in places. The Wendell family emerged behind her. Wesley first, blinking in the brilliant light. Then Eliza, holding Tess, who was awake now, who was breathing easier, whose color had come back overnight. Eliza was crying. Quietly, without any particular shame about it. Cyrus came up last. He stood in the barn door and he looked at the drifts. He looked at the chimney of his own house, far away, just visible above a long white slope. The chimney was not smoking. He saw what that meant. The wood had run out hours ago. If they had stayed. He turned to Astrid. He did not say anything. He just looked at her. His eyes were very full. She looked back. She nodded once. Then she walked past him out of the barn and into the white silence. She walked north. She walked toward the place where Hester Thorne lived. She walked because she had to know. 3 hours later, Hester Thorne, walking south, met Astrid Lindqvist halfway. The 2 women saw each other across 200 yards of crusted snow. Neither of them ran. Running in those drifts would have been impossible. They walked. They walked toward each other. They met. Astrid was 21 years old. Hester was 60. Their faces were burned by wind and by relief. Hester opened her good arm. Her right wrist was still in its splint, healing slowly, useless but mending. Astrid stepped into the embrace. Neither of them spoke. Behind them, a small brown sparrow flew up out of the snow and circled once and was gone. By April, the snow had retreated, and the creek was running and the ground was thawing in layers. Cyrus Wendell kept his word. He went to the railroad office in Bismarck. He restructured Astrid's note. 3 years, reduced interest. He went, after that, family by family, to the homesteads he had taken, to the people he had pushed east with his money in their pockets. He did not announce it. He did not ask for forgiveness. He simply began the work of returning what he could return. Some accepted, some did not. He kept going anyway. He repaid Hester Thorne for the 40 acres of her husband's bottomland. He paid her in cash. He did not ask her to thank him. She did not thank him. She took the money. She put it in a tin in her kitchen. She used it that summer to repair the roof of her barn. In late April, Astrid sat on the front step of her cabin, and she opened the letter from her mother, the letter that had been folded inside her grandmother's journal for 7 months. She held it in her lap. The paper was soft now. She read it. "Come home. You are too young to be alone. There is nothing left to prove there." Astrid read it twice. Then she took out a sheet of writing paper. She wrote a short letter. "Dear Mother, I am alive. I am well. I am staying. The land is mine. The cellar is mine. The work I did this winter is mine. Mama, I am home. I built it. She signed it." She folded it. She set it aside to send with the next mail. Hester Thorne came up the path. Her wrist was healed, stiff in cold weather, functional otherwise. She sat down beside Astrid on the step. She had brought a blue enamel pot of coffee. She had brought 2 cups. The 2 women sat together on the step in the spring sunlight. The cottonwoods were starting to think about leaves. The grass was green at the edges of the yard. Hester poured. Astrid took her cup. Hester said, "I have lived a long time, child. I have not seen many things like what you did." Astrid said, "I only did what my grandmother wrote." Hester said, "No, you did what you had to do. That is a different thing." They drank their coffee. The sun was warm on the porch. A small brown sparrow came down out of the cottonwood and landed on the railing. It cocked its head. It looked at them. Astrid looked back at it. She did not say anything. She did not have to. The earth beneath her feet, beneath the porch, beneath the cabin, beneath the barn, beneath all of it, continued. It did not fight the cold. It only had to be itself. And Astrid Lindqvist, 21 years old, widow of 7 months, owner of 1/4 section of Dakota soil with her name on the deed, sat on her own porch in her own sunlight and drank her own coffee. She was not afraid of the next winter. She knew where the warmth was. She had built it. It was hers. Ket Thuk.